A sign of his newfound trust and affection for the man who had pulled him from the depths of the swamp. Samantha walked over, still marveling at what she had just witnessed. "I can't believe it," she said, her voice filled with astonishment. "I had no idea you were capable of something like that, Liam." Liam looked up, a modest smile crossing his face. "It wasn't much," he replied in his usual quiet tone. "Just doing what needed to be done." He knelt down beside Max, stroking the dog's fur gently. He was in trouble. Anyone would have done the same. Samantha shook her head, a soft chuckle escaping her lips. "I'm not sure anyone else would have. You're different. You've always been so quiet, so private, but today, you showed us all what you're capable of." Liam didn't respond right away. He simply watched as Max lay down, still recovering from his ordeal, but comforted by Liam's presence. It was clear that there was something between them now, something that went beyond just a rescue. There was trust, something that had been earned, not given. Liam's quiet strength had bridged the gap between himself and the dog, and it was as if Max had recognized that this was the person who would always be there when he needed it most. As the days passed, Liam's relationship with Max deepened. Max began to follow Liam around the property, curling up at his feet when he worked in the garden or sat by the fire in the evenings. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and Liam, who had always preferred solitude, found that he no longer minded the company. In fact, he began to enjoy it. Samantha, too, found herself drawn into Liam's world. She started visiting him more often, offering to help with the small tasks he usually did alone. In return, Liam shared more of himself than ever before. They began to exchange stories about the neighborhood, the old days, and, over time, the quiet heroism that Liam had kept hidden. The people of the neighborhood started noticing the change in Liam as well. His willingness to step forward when others needed help became evident, and he became an unlikely but beloved figure in the community. Whether it was helping an elderly neighbor fix a fence, rescuing an animal in distress, or even volunteering to help build a new community garden, Liam's quiet acts of kindness began to draw him closer to those around him. It was during one of these moments, when Liam was helping a neighbor carry heavy bags of soil for the garden, that someone casually mentioned the rescue of Max. Word had spread quickly, and the story of the dog's near-death experience and miraculous survival had become a neighborhood legend. "You know," Mrs. Harper said with a grin, "I always thought Liam was a bit of a mystery, but I guess he's a hero in disguise." Liam simply smiled, the familiar modesty in his eyes. "I didn't do it for the recognition," he said quietly. "Just did what seemed right." His gaze softened as he looked at Max. "I just did what had to be done." Samantha, overwhelmed with emotion, leaned down and gently stroked Max's fur. The dog looked up at her with weary eyes, his breathing slow but steady. He was alive, thanks to Liam. The moment felt surreal, almost as if everything had happened in a haze. But there was no mistaking the reality of what had occurred. Max had been saved, and it was all because of Liam, the quiet, reclusive man who had never sought recognition, but had stepped forward when it mattered most. "I can't thank you enough," Samantha said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You saved him. You really saved him." Liam gave a small nod, his usual quiet demeanor returning. "Just glad I could help," he replied simply. Then, without another word, he stood up, brushing the mud from his clothes, and turned to leave. Max, now recovering, looked up at him one last time with gratitude in his eyes, his tail giving a weak wag. As Liam walked away, Samantha stood there for a moment, staring after him in disbelief. The man who had always kept to himself had just performed a courageous act of kindness, saving Max's life when no one else could. It was a reminder that sometimes, the quietest heroes are the ones who make the most profound impact. And in the end, Max had found his rescuer in the unlikeliest of places, a man who had been waiting, silently, to answer the call for help. As Liam gently set Max down on the soft, dry ground, the little dog let out a contented sigh, his exhaustion evident in the way his body sank into the earth. He looked up at Liam with wide, grateful eyes, and in a rare display of affection, Max immediately nuzzled Liam's hand, pressing his small head against the man's palm. The touch was gentle, almost as if the dog were thanking him for the life-saving rescue, and in that moment, the bond between them was forged, unspoken, but undeniable. Samantha watched from a distance, still in awe of the quiet man who had acted so decisively when Max's life had been on the line. She had never seen Liam in this light before. The reclusive neighbor, who had always kept to himself and barely interacted with anyone, had revealed a side of himself that no one knew existed, a side full of bravery, compassion, and strength. She had known Liam as a quiet presence in the neighborhood, an enigma, really. No one had ever seen him much, and rumors about his past floated around, but no one ever took the time to approach him. But this, what he had just done, was something entirely different. This wasn't a man hiding away in his solitude, this was someone who, when it mattered most, stepped up in a way no one expected. Max, now fully out of danger, let out a small, relieved bark and gave Liam another nudge, almost as though asking for more attention. The dog's tail, weak from exhaustion just moments ago, began to wag slowly but steadily. Every step a careful calculation of where the ground would hold and where it wouldn't. The swamp was treacherous, and though Liam knew it well, it was still dangerous, especially with Max's life hanging in the balance. His boots sunk into the mud with every step, but he kept moving, his body coiling with determination. "Hang in there, boy," Liam murmured under his breath as he reached Max. The dog's eyes were wide with fear, but there was also a sense of trust there, a quiet acknowledgement that help had finally arrived. Liam's strong arms reached down, grasping Max carefully but firmly. The dog gave a faint whimper as Liam's hands closed around his body, lifting him slowly but steadily from the swamp's grip. The mud seemed to resist, trying to pull Max back in, but Liam's strength was unwavering. With each movement, Max's body grew heavier in Liam's arms, but he never faltered. Every second felt like an eternity, but Liam's focus was absolute, his grip sure. Max's body was light, his fur slick with swamp water, but as Liam gently pulled him closer to the shore, the little dog gave a faint, exhausted sigh of relief. The worst of the struggle was over. Max's head fell against Liam's chest as the man carefully guided him towards safety, each step bringing them closer to solid ground. The final stretch was the hardest. Liam had to fight the slippery mud that threatened to pull them both back. With a grunt of effort, Liam planted his feet firmly and pushed forward, moving Max further from the water and toward the edge of the swamp. The deep, murky water no longer tugged at them, and with one last heave, Liam finally pulled Max out of the swamp. Exhausted but triumphant, Liam collapsed to his knees, cradling Max gently in his arms. The dog, who had been on the brink of collapse just moments earlier, now lay still, his body trembling, but safe. Max's eyes fluttered open and met Liam's with a look of gratitude that only the most loyal of dogs could express. Samantha, who had been watching from a distance, rushed over. Her breath caught in her throat as she knelt beside them, her hands trembling as she reached for Max. You did it," she said in awe, her voice shaking with relief. "He's okay." Liam nodded, his breathing heavy but controlled. He set Max gently on the ground, still keeping his hands near the dog's body to offer comfort. Max, though weary, looked up at him with grateful eyes, his tail weakly wagging in recognition. "You're safe now," Liam said softly, rubbing Max's ears in a slow, comforting rhythm. The dog's eyes closed momentarily, as if finally allowing himself to relax after the ordeal. Samantha, her hands still trembling, looked at Liam with a mixture of amazement and gratitude. "How did you know what to do?" she asked, still processing the miracle that had just unfolded before her eyes. Liam gave her a quiet, almost shy smile. "I've been around long enough to know when an animal needs help," he replied. He knew how deep the swamp could be and how dangerous it was. But Liam didn't hesitate. He had done this before. Max's weak howls became quieter, and it only spurred Liam on. He pushed through the muck, moving toward the spot where Max was trapped. The dog's small body was nearly submerged, but his eyes still searched desperately for help. When Max saw Liam approaching, his tail gave a faint, hopeful wag, but the exhaustion was evident. He wasn't far from giving up. With a calmness that belied the urgency of the situation, Liam reached Max, gently but firmly lifting the dog out of the mud. Max let out a small yelp, relieved, but still trembling with fear and fatigue. Slowly, Liam eased the dog up onto the firm ground, securing him with the rope, ensuring he wouldn't slip back into the swamp. Samantha watched in awe as Liam worked with quiet precision. It was clear that he had a natural connection with animals. Max responded to him almost immediately, resting his tired head against Liam's arm, grateful for the rescue. Liam turned back toward Samantha, his eyes meeting hers. "He's safe now," he said, his voice calm as always. "Let's get him home." Samantha felt a wave of relief wash over her as she rushed forward to join them. The sight of Max, now free from the swamp's grasp, filled her with gratitude. She couldn't believe that the quiet, reclusive man who had always kept to the shadows had just saved the dog she had feared might be lost forever. You saved him," she said, her voice filled with awe. Liam gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "It's what I do," he replied simply, as if the act of rescuing animals was second nature to him. Then, with a rare glimmer of warmth in his eyes, he added, "He's a good dog. He deserved to be saved." And with that, the unlikely hero, Liam, who had never sought recognition or praise, had performed a quiet but heroic act, reminding everyone that sometimes, true heroes come when you least expect them. Liam's eyes never left Max as he carefully moved toward the swamp. The sound of the water sloshing beneath his boots and the soft squelch of the mud beneath him seemed to fade into the background, drowned out by the desperate cries of the dog that still echoed through the air. Max's howls had subsided into exhausted whimpers, and when his eyes locked onto Liam's, there was a flicker of hope, tired and fragile, but still there. Max was exhausted. His tiny body trembled in the cold, murky water as his paws continued to sink deeper into the thick, sticky mud. The swamp had a way of swallowing everything it touched, and Max had no strength left to fight against it. His fur was caked with grime, and his once vibrant eyes were now dull with fatigue, but when he saw Liam coming toward him, something in the dog's heart stirred. It was as though he recognized the presence of someone who could save him. Liam's movements were measured and deliberate. And the muddy ground threatened to swallow her whole if she stepped in too far. But Max needed help now, and she was willing to do whatever it took. She took a deep breath and prepared to wade into the swamp, her heart pounding with fear and determination. She could already feel the pull of the mud beneath her feet, the danger of the water surrounding her. But as she was about to take that first step, something stopped her, something unexpected. A figure appeared at the edge of the swamp, emerging from the trees with surprising speed. He was tall, his movements deliberate, and despite his quiet presence, he seemed to cut through the air like someone who was used to navigating the wilderness. His worn boots crunched against the dry leaves, and his eyes were focused on the situation in front of him. It was Liam. Liam had lived in the area for as long as anyone could remember, though he was a figure shrouded in mystery. The reclusive man kept to himself, rarely seen by the other residents of the neighborhood. Some said he was a hermit, others claimed he had a past best left untouched. He didn't attend social gatherings or interact with the neighbors much, but when it came to the well-being of animals, there was no one more reliable than Liam. He had an uncanny ability to sense when an animal was in distress, and his reputation as an unexpected hero had slowly spread among the locals, though they had never gotten to know him personally. Samantha, still standing frozen at the edge of the swamp, watched as Liam moved toward her without hesitation. His expression was calm, almost as if he had been expecting this very moment. Without saying a word, he glanced at Max, then back at her. His eyes were full of determination, but there was a softness to them, too. "You're not going in there," Liam said, his voice gravelly but firm. Samantha opened her mouth to protest, but before she could, Liam was already taking action. With the precision of someone familiar with the terrain, he reached for a long rope that hung from his belt, effortlessly securing it around a nearby tree. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the urgency of the situation, but there was something in his eyes, something that told Samantha he knew exactly what to do. "I've got this," Liam said, turning to face her with a small, reassuring nod. "You stay here and keep an eye on Max. I'll get him out. Samantha, still taken aback by his sudden appearance and the quiet authority he exuded, could only nod in agreement. She didn't fully understand how he knew what to do, but in that moment, she realized that she could trust him. He wasn't like anyone else in the neighborhood, and in a strange way, his presence was exactly what they needed. Liam moved swiftly, his hand steady as he tested the strength of the rope. He took a few cautious steps toward the water, the thick mud sucking at his boots. Every movement was measured. She had seen him countless times darting around the neighborhood, his tail wagging furiously as he chased after anything that moved. Max was a regular presence, always full of energy, and never afraid to venture into places that most other dogs would shy away from. But hearing his howls, strained and desperate, sent an unsettling chill down her spine. Max's cries grew more frantic, filled with a panic that Samantha couldn't ignore. Without thinking, she dropped her teacup on the porch and rushed toward the sound. Her steps were quick, but her mind raced, wondering what could have happened. Had Max gotten into trouble? Was he hurt? Her concern mounted with every step she took toward the woods. As she neared the edge of the swamp, the thick trees began to open up, revealing the murky expanse of water that stretched beyond. The howls were now unmistakable, and Samantha's heart skipped a beat as she realized Max was in serious trouble. She pushed through the overgrown shrubs, her breath quickening as she moved closer, her eyes scanning for any sign of the dog. Then, just ahead, she saw him. Max was half submerged in the thick, murky water, his small body trembling as he struggled to stay afloat. His legs were caught in the mud, and the more he fought, the deeper he sank. The water around him was dark and still, and the once bright terrier mix looked smaller and weaker with each desperate attempt to free himself. His eyes locked onto Samantha's as he howled again, a long, pitiful cry that echoed through the swamp. Samantha's heart twisted. She could see the fear in his eyes, and in that moment, she knew she had to act fast. Without a second thought, she rushed toward him, trying to find a way to help, but the water and the mud made it difficult to navigate. "Hold on, Max," she called out, her voice shaking with fear. "I'm coming." Max whimpered, his tail wagging weakly as he recognized the sound of Samantha's voice, but the swamp seemed to hold him tighter, its grip on him unyielding. She reached for a sturdy branch near the edge of the water and tried to get closer, but the ground beneath her feet was just as treacherous. The last thing she wanted was to get stuck herself, but she couldn't let Max suffer alone. Max's cries had become weaker now, and it was clear that he was losing strength. Samantha's mind raced, she had to do something. The thought of him sinking further into the swamp terrified her. She couldn't lose him. She took a deep breath, pushed forward, and called for help. She knew she couldn't do it alone, but with the right assistance, they could save Max. Time was running out, and every second mattered. Samantha stood at the edge of the swamp, the thick, murky water stretching out before her. Max's cries were growing fainter, his small body sinking further into the mud. She felt a surge of panic, she couldn't just stand there. The water looked dangerous. Max, a small terrier mix with shaggy fur and bright, eager eyes, was known for his boundless energy and insatiable curiosity. He loved exploring the woods and fields near his home, always eager to chase after a squirrel or sniff out something new. His owner, Emma, had learned to keep a careful eye on him, as his sense of adventure often led him into trouble. On one particularly warm afternoon, Max ventured farther than usual, drawn by the thick scent of wet earth and the promise of adventure that the nearby swamp seemed to hold. The swamp, a murky expanse of stagnant water and twisted trees, had always fascinated him, even though Emma had warned him to stay away from it. But the allure of the unknown was too strong, and Max couldn't resist. At first, it was just a simple exploration. Max padded along the muddy banks, his paws sinking slightly into the soft ground as he sniffed around. The deeper he went, the more the swamp seemed to pull him in, its dense vegetation and still waters tempting him to explore further. But what Max didn't realize was just how dangerous the swamp could be. As he ventured deeper, the ground beneath him began to soften, and soon, he found himself wading through the thick, murky water. The deeper he went, the stronger the pull of the mud beneath him became, and soon his legs were caught, trapped in the swamp's thick grasp. Panic surged through Max as he struggled, his paws sinking deeper into the mud with each attempt to free himself. His howls broke the eerie silence of the swamp, piercing the air with a desperate cry for help. His little body thrashed against the muck, but with each struggle, he only seemed to sink further. The thick trees around him stood silent, as if indifferent to his plight. Max's frantic barks echoed through the stillness, but no one was near enough to hear them. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the swamp, as Max's strength began to wane. His howls grew weaker as exhaustion set in. The water, murky and cold, closed in around him, and with every passing moment, the fear that he might not escape tightened its grip on him. Alone in the swamp, Max's cries became the only sound in an otherwise lifeless world. His body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the terrifying realization that no one was coming. Samantha had always been the type of person to notice the small things. The rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant calls of birds, or the faint sounds of footsteps in the yard, nothing escaped her sharp ears. As she sat on her porch one warm afternoon, enjoying a cup of tea and the quiet hum of the neighborhood, a sound broke through the peaceful stillness. It was faint at first, barely audible over the rustling of the trees, but it quickly grew louder. It was a dog's howl. A cry for help. Samantha's head snapped up, her heart immediately racing. It sounded like Max, the terrier mix, who lived a few houses down. The story of Max's rescue by Liam became one of the most talked about events in the neighborhood. It wasn't just about the dog who had been saved, it was about the man who had come out of the shadows to perform an extraordinary act of bravery. People who had once barely noticed Liam now saw him in a new light, not as the reclusive figure who lived on the outskirts of town, but as a hero, someone who had quietly stood apart only to step forward when it mattered most. The neighborhood embraced him in a way they hadn't before. He was no longer the man who kept to himself, but an essential part of the community. While Liam still enjoyed his solitude, he had begun to realize that the connection with his neighbors wasn't as burdensome as he had once thought. In fact, it felt good to have people who cared, people who acknowledged the value he brought not just through his actions, but simply by being there. Max, of course, played a huge part in this transformation. The bond between them had only deepened since the rescue. Max followed Liam everywhere, whether he was working in the garden or simply sitting on the porch, soaking in the quiet of the evening. The little dog, forever grateful for the life Liam had saved, now became his constant companion. The once timid, silent man had found solace in the loyalty and love of an animal that he had never imagined could change his life so profoundly. Samantha, too, had become a closer friend. She continued to visit often, and their conversations moved from casual exchanges to deep, meaningful discussions. Liam, who had always been a man of few words, now found himself sharing more about his past, his motivations, and his dreams. He had always felt like an outsider, but the connection he now had with Max, and the friendship he had developed with Samantha, made him realize he was part of something bigger. He had a place here. The rest of the community had grown to admire him. When there was a need, whether it was repairing a neighbor's fence or helping to organize a town event, Liam was there, quietly but efficiently lending a hand. It was clear that, despite his past reluctance to get involved, his presence was invaluable. And Max, always by his side, had become a symbol of that quiet strength. The dog's wagging tail was a reminder that, sometimes, the simplest and most genuine acts of kindness could change everything. One fall evening, as the sun began to set and cast golden hues over the neighborhood, Liam stood at the edge of the park, watching Max run through the grass, tail wagging as he chased a falling leaf. Samantha walked up beside him, her smile wide as she took in the peaceful scene. "You've come a long way, Liam," she said, her voice soft but full of meaning. "Not just with Max, but with the whole neighborhood. I think you've found your place here." Liam glanced down at her, his expression thoughtful. "I never thought I needed a place," he said quietly. "But maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's not about being alone, it's about knowing when to let people in." Samantha nodded, her eyes on Max. It took Max to show you that, didn't it? Liam chuckled, a rare sound that echoed softly in the cool evening air. He certainly played his part, he said, watching as Max bounded back toward him, tongue hanging out and eyes bright with happiness. As the months passed, the neighborhood continued to flourish, and so did the bond between Liam, Max, and the community. Rufus Day celebrations, neighborhood potlucks, and town cleanups all became regular events where Liam, once a figure of solitude, now stood at the heart of it all. He was no longer the quiet man who lived on the edge of town, he was a vital part of the fabric that held the community together. The legend of Max's rescue, and the quiet hero who saved him, became more than just a story, it became a lasting reminder that sometimes, the most unexpected heroes come from the places we least expect. Liam had found his place, not by seeking recognition, but by simply being there when it mattered most. And with Max by his side, he was no longer alone, not in the swamp, not in the neighborhood, and not in the world. They were a team, a quiet duo that had changed everything. And so, the story of Liam and Max, the unlikely bond between a reclusive man and a dog, lived on, solidifying their places in the hearts of the people who had come to love them. The once silent man had become a hero, not for the grand gestures he'd made, but for the simple, selfless act of saving a life. Years passed, but the bond between Liam and Max remained as strong as ever. The neighborhood had evolved, becoming more connected than it had ever been before, and Liam, once a reclusive figure on the outskirts of town, had become a cornerstone of that community. His quiet, steadfast nature had made him a hero, not through grand gestures, but through the small, meaningful acts of kindness he performed every day. Max, though now older, continued to follow Liam wherever he went. His fur had become grayer, and his steps slower, but his loyalty had not wavered. The once timid terrier had blossomed under Liam's care and love, and now, together, they were inseparable, partners not just in daily life, but in the legacy they had created. Samantha, who had witnessed the transformation in both Liam and the neighborhood, often remarked on how different the town felt. It was more than just the changes in the physical landscape, new gardens, renovated parks, and improved streets. It was the sense of belonging, the spirit of community that had grown, nurtured by the unlikely hero and his dog. People now gathered more, worked together more, and shared in each other's lives, and much of that was thanks to Liam and Max's unspoken example. As the years went by, Liam became a symbol of what it meant to truly be part of something bigger than oneself. He never sought recognition or accolades. His quiet presence, however, had a way of teaching others what it meant to care, to show up when it mattered, and to give without expecting anything in return. Then came the day when Max, older and frail, could no longer keep up with Liam on their walks. It wasn't sudden, Max had been slowing down for months, but Liam had always been there, gently encouraging him along. Max had walked with him through thick and thin, through the swamps and the streets, sharing in all the quiet moments of life. On that final morning, as Liam and Max walked through the park, the place where they had often shared the simplest of moments, Liam knew the time was near. He paused, kneeling beside Max, his hands resting gently on the dog's aging head. "You've done your part, Max," Liam whispered, his voice full of tenderness. "You've been my friend, my partner, my hero. It's okay now. You can rest." Max looked up at him, his eyes still filled with the love and loyalty that had never wavered, even in his old age. And with that, Max lay down in the grass beside Liam, his body finally giving in to the years of love, adventure, and friendship. The entire neighborhood mourned Max's passing, and yet, his memory remained alive in the hearts of everyone who had known him. The quiet, courageous dog who had bridged the gap between a solitary man and a community, whose rescue had brought a town together, was remembered with deep affection. In the days and months that followed, Liam, though saddened by the loss of his faithful companion, carried on with the quiet dignity that had defined him all along. But now, more than ever, he found solace in the community he had helped shape. People reached out more, offering their support, as they knew the quiet man who had once rescued Max had given so much more to them than they could ever repay. The park where Max had played, the place where he had walked with Liam all those years, was dedicated to the dog's memory. A statue was commissioned, a small, lifelike figure of Max, with a collar around his neck and his tail caught in a wag, as if frozen in the happiest moment of his life. And beneath the statue, a plaque read, "In honor of Max, who showed us the true meaning of loyalty, and of Liam, who taught us the power of quiet courage." Though Max was gone, his spirit lived on in every corner of the community. And Liam, forever the quiet hero, carried the lessons learned from his companions' love and bravery forward. The legacy they left together was one of connection, compassion, and the unspoken power of showing up for others when they needed it most. And so, in the hearts of everyone who had come to know them, Liam and Max's story lived on, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected bonds, those formed in quiet moments and unspoken gestures, can change the course of a community, and leave behind a legacy that endures for generations.